unsuitable. The board selected Chief Viera Rosa to serve as the interim chief over the department shortly after that. And so this isn't our first interaction with Chief Viera Rosa. He has attended recent POC meetings and engaged in meaningful discourse around current events, including the use of Barry J. and Central following their unsuitability findings, as well as his plan to move the youth waiting adjudication into Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. And so there's a lot of forward motion, but this conversation is primarily about taking a step back, offering you, Chief, the proper introduction or an opportunity to give us one, welcoming you into the county, and really trying to understand where you stand on some of the issues before us. And so we certainly thank you for taking this on and participating today. We're going to leave it to to Wendy Julian, our executive director, to briefly share the plan for today, along with some ground rules for participants, and then we'll get started with their introduction and some questions. So Wendy, if you could please proceed after that choppy introduction for me. Thank you.
Not choppy, Chair Jackson. It was fine. And I extend a welcome as well. Thank you for doing this, Chief Viera Rosa. This is a virtual town hall today, not a public meeting. It's a public meeting, of course, open to the public, but not an official meeting of the Probation Oversight Commission. But we will be broadcasting live to our YouTube page and not engaging with viewers there. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at LA County POC. And please invite others to attend. Today's town hall is not governed by the Brown Act. We don't have a quorum of probation oversight commissioners here in their official roles. Some of them are joining as members of the public, as you all are, and we will not be taking any action today. We encourage participation. We're going to leave plenty of time for comments. We are thankful to all of you who sent questions in advance. There were a lot of them, and we will be sharing. We have actually already shared those that came in by this morning with the chief. And some of them are similar to some of the questions I think you will hear today. And also, hopefully we can get some answers over the next few months to some of the other ones that we don't have time for. If you would like to submit a comment in writing, you're welcome to do so at info@poc.lacounty.gov. After the conversation between Chair Jackson and Chief Viera Rosa, we'll open the floor to public comments and questions. Given how many people are attending today, we're going to limit each commenter to 1 minute or 2 minutes if translation is required. But unlike the regular public meetings, if you have a question rather than a public comment, and especially if you could do it briefly, we will give the Chief or Chair Jackson the opportunity to answer if they wish. Una cordial bienvenida a personas que están con nosotros que prefieren hacer sus comentarios en español. Les daremos 2 minutos y podemos traducir al inglés. Nomás dígame que prefiere hacer su comentario y yo le traduzco, o puede proveer su propio traductor, pero gracias por estar con nosotros. We ask that you follow a few respectful communication guidelines during today's meeting to introduce yourself with your name, share your thoughts that belong to you, and be respectful of the time so as many people can speak as possible. Honor equity and participation, and practice grace and openness with each other. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair Jackson.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Chief Viera Rosa, welcome, and thanks again for joining us today. Your background is obviously really impressive and kind of speaks for itself, but of course we'd like to hear it directly from you. So we'd like to give you a few moments to share some introductory remarks where you just sort of tell us about yourself and your background.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the welcome. I really appreciate this opportunity. Much of what my work is in these few weeks and months in this position will be to actually hear from folks that are affected by the work that we do in probation. That's incredibly important to me. I take very seriously the comments and questions that are sent my way in order to inform how we can best move forward and actually provide better services to the youth and all the people that are affected by the decisions we make here. So it's just as valuable for me to hear from all of you. So I really encourage you to, if you have something on your mind, to please send it my way so that take into consideration. Well, I don't want to take too much of our limited time focusing on myself or where I've come from, but I have 27 gone 28 years in a variety of agencies, most of it surrounding community corrections. So probation, pretrial, parole, and some other roles, including the Board of Prison Terms, where I sat as a deputy commissioner for some time. But what they've all had in common really is serving people that are in some part of the criminal justice system. Most of it a piece of providing services to try to reduce recidivism and see how we can interact so that folks have different opportunities and different environment to make different choices in their life.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure we can at some point revisit some of the details of your background as they sort of tie into my line of questioning, but I think it's a good time for us to just sort of dive into some of the questions that myself, other commissioners, and even members of the public have had. So Chief, you joined the Probation Department during a time of significant crisis. I think we all sort of understand the state that the department was in when you arrived. You initially joined as the chief strategist, as I mentioned earlier. We'd like to know how your understanding of your initial role as chief strategist and your existing role as interim chief probation officer changed your perception of the work that you need to do, and how that has sort of maybe shifted your vision, your goals, and your priorities in the role.
Such a great question. So the function as the chief strategist over juvenile operations was intentional in order to really focus all of the resources that we have at the county for this particular task that has to do with how best to serve the juvenile population that we have in custody. In the new role as interim probation chief, none of that changes. Really, it's an opportunity to unify all of the services within the department to that end. And so although there are other responsibilities with respect to the adult side and the community supervision services that we provide and a whole host of other services provided to the courts, for example, I think it's a strength really, because the role of the chief strategist and those responsibilities continue, but it'll allow us to, in a more uniform fashion or unified fashion, I should say, make sure that the entirety of the department is in line with what the efforts as we go forward.
Okay. Could you maybe take a few moments to actually lay out what your goals and priorities are? And we can say for the next 90 days, just to make it manageable.
Even 90 days doesn't really feel manageable at this point, but a fair point, which essentially the most obvious piece has been, as was mentioned earlier, that right at the beginning of my arrival, we had an outstanding issue and hearings with the Board of State Corrections. And ahead of that, make an assessment on how to move forward, meaning how are we going to provide services for the youth that we have in our custody? And the answer to that really has been the basis for what we're doing in these next few months, which is consolidating where we're providing services to particular parts of the population that we have housed with us. And so it is an intentional strategy by the Probation Department, Board of Supervisors, and the rest of the county that we take a look at the needs of the youth that we have and then consolidate by population so that we can provide better services. So the most important piece here is the move out of Central Juvenile Hall, essentially abandoning providing services there for predisposition youth, moving to Dos Padrinos Juvenile Hall in Downey, and consolidating the services that we're going to provide for predisposition youth there. At the same time, we have another population of young people that are with us, consolidating them, the SYTF folks that are going to be with us for a bit longer at the Nydorf Juvenile Hall in Silmar. We still have other locations where we provide services, camps, for example. Those will continue to operate. But really by bifurcating and saying there are different types of needs and services for these populations. So consolidating at these two locations it's going to be advantageous for us on a number of fronts. One of them, as we move forward to looking at different programs and contracting for services, we're really going to be able to do more needs assessments that are specific to that population and bring services that are more appropriate for them in these two locations. The other piece is, it's no secret that we've been struggling with staffing, this will assist us and be able to more appropriately staff at those two locations so that we have adequate staffing 24/7, 7 days a week to be able to better care for care. That's a priority now. That is such a big endeavor that much of the work that we're doing is really toward that first piece. That's not the end of the story. That's just the beginning. Taking this time to really reimagine how we provide services, reimagine where we see probation in a larger juvenile justice context. And so this is really the beginning of that. It's tough to get too far down the road because, like I said, it's such a big job that we have currently. But what you'll see after we do this initial move, as required by BSCC, is a different type of engagement from probation to our community partners and our civic organizations. It's not simply a move of location, but it's also a focus on a change perspective, a different paradigm, how we interact with families and the youth. I strongly believe that we all have responsibility toward the youth that we have. By all, I mean anyone who's a stakeholder, from the actual families of the youth to probation, to the courts, to the other county departments that all interact and provide service to these young people, that we do it in a unified front. So a probation juvenile hall is simply a location where all of these larger families, these larger network members can come and provide those services. Moving forward, we're going to have a lot more input from those stakeholders on how we provide those services. So I'm essentially describing an interdisciplinary approach at these locations to make sure that we all have an equal voice on changing the circumstances so that these young people can be successful. That's step one. That's a paradigm shift. And probation has always done this in small pieces here and there, but we're saying very publicly and out loud that this is our focus and this is how we're going to move forward. That's step number one. Step number two is really acknowledging that most of the young people that come to juvenile halls will be back in their communities of origin in a relatively short period. And so much of the work that we need to do is making sure that we're making the connections with the support network that they're going to need when they're released. That's the second big focus for probation, making sure that if you're provided a service while you're in juvenile hall, really that's insufficient. If when you're released, that ends, we want to make sure that there's a coordinated effort and services that take place when they're inside juvenile halls, when they're released. We really think that's the only way to have really profound effect on this future. And so there's a lot on our plate currently, simply with respect to the move. But I really want to make clear to folks that that's just the beginning of a larger plan on.
Thank you so much for spending time with that and giving us a very detailed answer. I believe that the goals related and unrelated to the move are intrinsic to what we've been really sort of looking forward to, which is a strategic plan, right? So knowing what you know now, knowing that you need to continue to sort of conduct needs assessment, how does a strategic planning process look for the department?
Yeah, it's difficult for me because, and I know I've said this more than once with other groups, so forgive me if you hear me going back to the same points over and over, but in order of operations, this is somewhat backwards. Typically, an interim probation chief would come in, they would have town hall meetings, they would listen to folks, and then develop an internal strategic plan, share it with everyone so that we know in a very transparent way what it is we're doing with benchmarks over the course of the next months and years. That would be so that everybody inside of the department, especially employees, know where they fall and what their responsibilities and expectations are with respect to that, as well as everyone else, so that they know where to judge and what to expect from the department. Because of the current crisis, we're sort of doing this backwards. And so I'm spending much of the time explaining what we're doing in the immediate future and essentially saying, asking for goodwill, saying, I'm coming back to you with a longer plan, explaining how all these pieces fall together. And I understand how that doesn't necessarily resonate because folks want to see the entirety of the plan together. But what I can do, the short term, is describe some of the elements that will go into that strategic plan. We'll come back later in the near future with a very public strategic plan that says, these are the timeframes for these activities to take place. But in the interim, I can describe what some of those pieces are. That's what I did a little bit of previously here. But I can go further. We know that in order to really create a system that meets the needs of the youth that are in our care, there are a couple of things that seem like they're small, but are tremendously meaningful. They have to do with things like the initial assessment for it to be validated, the risk and needs assessment, and for us to double down on making sure that all subsequent assessments are dynamic. And so that they're not simply taking into consideration the static risks that led them into juvenile hall, but they really acknowledge behavior change. And that feeds into a positive feedback and loop in the type of activities that they're allowed to take part in. The second piece is that it needs to be measurable and transparent so that after you do an assessment and you come up with a plan, that the young person has agency in that plan and that they can actually look at the plan. You know, sometimes we're talking about printing a plan so that you know what you're working on, so that your family knows what you're working on, so that every officer and staff member that you interact with knows what you're working on, and so that you have those goals moving forward. I'm describing small pieces within our system that are all going to be part of sort of this larger plan on how we're going to tackle meeting the needs of these young.
So, of course, in a perfect world, you would be able to begin your tenure with this listening tour and hopefully allow the feedback that you get from stakeholders to maybe shape the goals and priorities that you've shared here. But to what degree have you been able to listen to their needs, like in the sort of present time, and how are you using that to shape the strategic plan? Like, can you give us anything specific? Because we hear from staff members, we hear from different people who don't feel like their perspective has been accounted for. And if you could maybe just speak to, it sounds like you still need time to sort of hear from more people and you will revisit their ideas at some point. But I think that as we're going into this move and really sort of desperate for specificity, we'd like to know what you've already done to hear from them and to validate their perspective and how things should move from here.
Yeah, this is an example of it. So where possible, I am continuously meeting with different groups, from the unions to meeting with leadership groups, leadership training groups, to actually line staff, meeting with county partners. I consider all of these valuable input. As you mentioned, because this is sort of a moving target, and we don't have any time to waste, what I'll be doing is exactly what I'm doing today, which is essentially I'm sharing my perspective, taking a shot at the things that I believe are going to be important moving forward. Let that sit with folks, see if it resonates or not, and then receive feedback on whether it's either missing the mark, they really understand why and the purpose for it, and share what missing elements there may be. The good news is that for us to have a really healthy probation system, this is going to be ongoing. So it's not simply coming in, initially receiving feedback, and then it's a one and done. Really, the way I envision it is, from a management perspective, I'm going to make some decisions with respect to policy, but those are not, this isn't etched in stone. As we see whether those things we can have measurable positive outcomes. If we don't, we retool, we come back and we're flexible and we make different decisions. That's the part where the stakeholder is giving feedback. We understand this was the intent. It's not the result we had. Here are some other suggestions, and we retool and we move forward. So it's more, from my perspective, about having ongoing interaction, folks that are advisors, advisory councils, for example, and that's part of the permanent institution to continue to receive that feedback, rather than simply have these cutoff points and say, thank you for your input, we're done, we're going to make some decisions.
Sure. And how is that feedback channeled? How is it collected? How is it how is it how are you collecting it? Is it a town hall? Is it a survey? Is it just casual conversations?
Yeah, currently I'm receiving this information with all the different groups I'm meeting, whether they're department heads or, like I mentioned before, unions, or simply running into staff and hearing from them. So currently it's, large fire hose. Moving forward, we're really going to look for having sort of more targeted, institutionalized way of doing that. For example, I really believe in having advisory councils. Some of the other places I've worked for specific populations, we've had advisory groups on specific areas. I'll likely look to do the same here, so that it makes sure that on a regular basis, we're receiving feedback from folks that are affected and sort of actionable items.
Great, thank you. So I want to maybe pivot to something I believe we opened the door to at our last meeting, and it's leadership. I'd like to know how leadership has been examined since you started, and if there's alignment between, if there's goal alignment, basically.
Are you're referring to internal?
Yeah,
Probation?
yeah, internal leadership. Yeah. Managers, executive leadership.
Well, that's a tough question, because I'll be, to be quite blunt about it, I certainly receive a lot of criticism from external groups suggesting that there has either been a lack of leadership, or they point out to particular promotional patterns, and folks are have some strong feelings about this. What I can say is that um, I'm gonna be fair always, and my interaction with the leadership staff at probation has been positive to date. When I have expressed the needs and what has to take place, there's been a positive response and a move by employees to do that. I'm not really interested in looking back and saying under a previous administration X, Y, or Z was done. But I am very keen that moving forward with me at the helm, there's very clear expectations on what our role is within the system, and that we have immediate movement where we have areas where we need to make corrections. And so I don't know that this will always be my assessment moving forward, as folks either produce or are effective or not. What I can tell you is that so far, with respect to the leadership team, there's an understanding of what the goals are. Haven't had anyone say that they're not on board or going to move in that direction. And I think that folks adjust when you're very clear with them on what the requirements are and expectations are, and the why. It's also fair to explain why. It's always been my belief that it's insufficient to simply say, look, this is what we're doing, this is the policy. We're adults and we have a need to understand the why, and the why sometimes is more important than simply the action itself.
Can you delve more deeply into the expectations that you have set for your team or that you have discussed? And alternatively, can you talk about any areas of correction that you've identified so far within the leadership team?
I think it falls in line with a bit of what I've already mentioned. We have a perspective that says probation is an outward-looking institution where we welcome participation from other departments, nonprofit entities, And so that's a very clear expectation from my part, which is we're not going to be isolationists. We don't believe that this is work we can do on our own, and that we respect collaboration of these other departments and entities, even if we, and maybe especially if we don't necessarily agree on every issue, that we value their perspective, we value that they have something different to offer than we do. That's an expectation that I have of every employee, especially management, which may be different than what has. We're not in the business of competing with other folks. Quite the opposite. Changing lives is one of the most difficult things that anybody can undertake. We certainly aren't going to do that in isolation strategy.
And what about those areas of correction? It seems that maybe in the time that you've been in this position, you probably have been able to identify, irrespective of external input and perspective, maybe changes that could be made to improve, you know, leadership within the department.
Yeah, I'm really focused on process to get us to those goals and things that we can measure. If we're talking about coming back and doing assessments of individuals and their positions and their roles, whether they're effective or not, that's an ongoing process, and we follow civil service process. But it's particularly important that we model with employees the same belief systems that we say do for those that are in our care. So we really want everybody to be successful, every employee to be successful. We have to give them the tools and the opportunity to be successful. I certainly don't come onto the job with a perspective that, oh, I'm going to find the people that aren't performing well. And that's just never how I've done business. It's quite the opposite. I'm looking to create an environment for people to be successful and perhaps do even more and better than they otherwise would have if been here and put in that direction. So that's not to say I'm easy to work for. Be very demanding and really expect folks to give their all to this job when they go into a profession that is really about human services and affecting the lives of others. That's a heavy lift and a heavy burden. So we expect a lot from our folks.
I understand that. I certainly wasn't looking for you to pinpoint any person and make this a person-centered sort of response, even though I do believe that some might have perspective on specific individuals. I think what I was really hoping to hear is that in this, I mean, you really are in the process of building rapport with your team, right? You haven't worked with them very long. You're trying to understand what they have to contribute, where they're strong, maybe where they need improvement. But it has more to do with this sort of process of taking inventory and really understanding, as we're dissecting issues, where the true issues lie, right? And so, sure, that's ongoing, but we have to be able to come in and make an initial assessment and say, this thing here needs to be fixed right away, whether that's attached to a person, a process, a practice, and you're saying that's an ongoing thing, but you're not saying that there's any specific thing that you've identified that needs to be addressed immediately as far as, executive personnel are concerned. That's right.
Not exactly. I certainly have identified issues within the department that are urgent, need immediate attention, and we have to pivot and do things very differently than we have in the past. So with respect to issues, absolutely fair to say there's a whole host of those. Some of them folks can guess, they're very public. We have lots of external entities that have made criticisms, some of them fair, on areas where we need to improve. And so those are very real, very tangible, very immediate. With respect to personnel, at this point, it's an all hands on deck situation with folks generally responding and really being very committed to making that change.
Okay, so I can take it to a higher point and sort of ask you to identify strengths within the department right now. Where's the department strong or doing things well?
You can hear that in the background. Just want to give a second for the sirens to go by and not drown out. You know, one of the most impressive things, probation in general, but this department in particular, it has some real strengths. Because LA County probation is so large and has such deep history, there is really some deep subject matter expertise and experience within the department. Now, it's my job moving forward to really create process that allows for that to rise to the top. There is collectively so much experience and such a variety of experience and subject matter expertise in areas within this department that would not be well served if I don't find a process to really bring those people in, part of the solution here. For almost any area that we choose, we have staff within this department that have deep understanding, experience, and much better suggestions that I can ever come up with. It's about finding them, empowering them, giving them ownership, and part of the solution. And so that's different than some other agencies I've worked in where really, part of it is size, scope of experience, and that's an advantage here versus in other places. Again, like I said, the challenge is really finding the folks and empowering them to really engage them in that. It's tough. In large organizations, sometimes we use titles or ranks to sort of determine the level of participation someone should have. That's a real mistake. Really, we have folks that have, like I said again, some real deep understanding in certain areas that has nothing to do with their rank. We need to pull them in when we have a need for them. So that's really an area that I have to focus on where I haven't been able to spend enough time. But whenever I meet with a group of our probation folks, inevitably always find that there's this gem of someone. That's one strength. The other is, irrespective of some folks' experience or what has taken place, there is a core of probation staff that is committed to this work and to changing lives that is really impressive. It's their life's work. And that should not be ignored. We have folks that come to work every day, not because they're motivated by pay, not because they couldn't go work somewhere else that would be less challenging, but because they actually believe in changing lives. And they keep coming in and they keep doing that work regardless of what's happening around them, regardless of all the sort of political shifts, resource shifts. They continue to do it. They do it because they're committed to the work. That's what they decided to do with their lives. That's what they've been doing for decades. That's the core of the culture that we want in probation. Don't want to lose that. Have to hold folks accountable to all sorts of other things. But the fact that that core exists within LA County probation, that's something to be proud of. That's something to really highlight and find a way, for me, to find a way to normalize that piece as really the expectation of what we want from it.
So can you give us an example of a staff member that has subject matter expertise that could positively contribute to some existing effort you have underway?
Oh, we have tons of staff members that do that. We had, I'll give you an example of a staff member that unfortunately recently retired, but like her, we have other folks that really took it upon herself over the course of the last couple decades to really become sort of a national expert in sex trafficking, child sexual trafficking, and an incredible amount of work to move us forward in that space, up to incredibly impressive written work toward that end that really ahead of her time was here in probation, leading that effort, sometimes when there were no resources dedicated to it, and then other times really working at the state level to make sure that there was sufficient resources being dedicated to it, really being a national leader with respect to it, working with KSOM, working with Sorazzo, and those pieces. That happened because of that employee's dedication and the expertise that they gained over years. That didn't necessarily simply happen because probation as an entity was doubling down on those efforts. And like her, there are many other employees that are subject matter experts in really forming relationships with young people that have been doing motivational interviewing before motivational interviewing is popular and we trained everybody. And we just have folks that are that know the core of the work we do, that do it despite what happens around them. And really, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those culture ambassadors that bring in, make sure that they're the folks that are empowering to continue the.
I agree. I definitely don't think the department is short of, you know, high quality subject matter experts. But I think it definitely has a problem investing in its talent. I think it has a problem protecting its talent. It has a problem just sustaining its talent. And that's why we see the issue of turnover. We see the issue of staffing, and some other things. And so I guess before I move on to my next question, I'd like to know how you planned with specificity, because we're very invested in the how at this point, and how you will protect that core group of committed probation staff, because just because we have them right now doesn't mean that we always will. So,
No, you're right about that. A lot of it, I think, employees will correct me. I'm sure in the segment that we have later when folks can ask questions, but I think employees really respond to sort of the tone of leadership and how they interact with folks. It goes far beyond simply having a message or putting on a poster, look, these are the things those things are important, but the way that we interact with each other, the way that we value folks when they have ideas, even if ultimately we don't do them, that very respectful manner in which we interact and value employees, that spreads. That's really what employees are looking for. Employees are looking for not so much that you agree with them and you give them great latitude, but how you react when you don't necessarily agree with one of their ideas. Do you receive ideas with respect? Do you actually weigh them and where appropriate, utilize them? Do you allow them to be part of the fabric of the department? Those are the things that I think will create an environment where folks feel the freedom to actually speak up and show you what their talents are and volunteer. That's how you test, by the way, when you have a need and you ask for volunteers. If you get volunteers, it's because they feel that it's safe to step out of their normal role without fear of repercussion or without any of those things, that they're willing to do more and really tell you the things that they value, versus when you're having to forcefully assign people because you just can't find volunteers. Time will tell on that piece. But my strategy is really the way that I interact with staff, my expectation of how we interact with each other. Every employee should have equal voice here. Now, the way we structure our system is necessary so that there's a final decision maker on every given issue. But every employee has equal voice in terms of giving their opinion, how they see the state of affairs, what they think should be done, and we should value that and where possible, give folks opportunities to give their opinion and be part of the solution.
sure. I certainly anticipate coming back to the issue of how you will sort of protect this core staff membership at some point to really figure out how we'll reinvest in them. But to move on to the next question concerning data, I'd like to know, because we know that one of the biggest challenges the POC has faced in conducting oversight the past year has been the lack of data. The department has explained that their systems are antiquated and that there's really not a culture of collecting and sharing data and outcomes. But we all know that this is really, really key information that's needed to, see the change that we'd like to see, right? It's the analytics that we need in order to make decisions and all that stuff. So what are your views about the value of data and the outcomes-based decision-making that I'm sort of alluding to, and how can we work together to fix this issue, basically?
I'm not sure yet how we're going to fix this. Staff are not exaggerating when they say that we have antiquated systems that, at their best, are insufficient to collect the information that we need for decision making, and at its worst, really skew some of the facts and the data. So I'm not prepared at this time to put forward what our proposal is, but what I can tell you is that it is likely that we will need a significant investment so that that initial component, which is the data collection piece, is sort of credible in terms of the inputs, so that then we can inform decision making and really provide a system that is actionable. That's not to say that we're not currently invested in it and that we don't have tremendous work being done by folks in the department dedicated specifically to that. We do have items that we currently collect and we can utilize for performance management and those pieces. But I don't want to, I certainly am not going to diminish the perspective that you've heard that essentially says, look, we have very antiquated systems. Some of it has been sort of deferred maintenance, and it is likely that there will have to be a large scale project here to really get us to where we need to be, so that we can have actionable bits of data that are informing leadership. This is an important piece to me. So simply sort of deferring, saying that, look, I don't have the plan to share, doesn't mean it's not important to me. In one of my prior roles, I was the head of research and created a risk assessment unit. So it's important to me. I've lived in that world, in that space, which is one of the reasons why I want to be very careful before presenting a plan here. But I can tell you, we do have antiquated systems, and it's probably going to be a very heavy lift here to get us where we need.
Yeah, I mean, data is not just important, it's critically important. And I would even argue that you need the data to base the plans on, you know what I mean? So if we don't have a lot of this really important information, I would say that it is hard to maybe build plans that are specific to what we are observing in the numbers. But if you don't know how to fix it, my question is, when do you think you will know? And I know that it's going to take time, but is this a 2024 resolution? Is it beyond that? Is it sooner than that?
I don't want to leave anybody with the wrong impression that because we have antiquated systems and there's probably going to be a large scale investment ask in the future, that we don't move forward with what we have. We have folks that on a daily basis are really collecting information to spot patterns, to make quality assessment recommendations, and all of that. Because of my perspective, having run sort of a very large Office of Research operation, I know the scale of these things, and really to have fidelity and data collection and create a data lake or a data lagoon from which you can pull. Those are projects that take 5-10 years. I mean, these are not things that are turned around in 1 or 2. But we have luckily, other strategies to help inform what we do while we get better data. So we know of best practices. We know of things that other entities sort of measure these type of activities tend to have these type of results, right? So what you really do is you lean on that knowledge when you're doing things like deciding what type of services to contract for. The data piece is the part where you have to come in and see if, in fact, we can say that specifically in our system, this activity, for example, this programming, has this type of effect. So then we can decide if that's something where we want to continue with, or if we need to make changes, or it's appropriate for another population. That's where we ultimately want to be. That's how we want to do business. In the interim, you go on best practices because it's been proven to work somewhere else.
Well, I think it's the collection piece, but I'm also speaking to the sharing piece, right? Because the POC has outstanding data requests, and it's really about how the existing data is used and shared. And that's part of the question around how we can fix this issue of us having if the information that we need to effectively oversee the department.
Yeah,
Is
no,
this the first time?
I'm sorry, say it again.
No, I'm just wondering if this is the first time that you've heard about our data requests.
No, yeah, it's not. And so we're working on, I want to make sure that for the time that I'm here, that the data that is shared with you, I'm personally attesting to how accurate it is, and that in fact it's measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. And so you're entitled to get the information that we have collected. We will continue to strive to have ongoing data collection in a way that makes sense for people. Let me describe ultimately what the system should be and what I've done somewhere else. Where when you collect data in a manner that upfront, you know, is high quality, then the best and the most transparent way to do it is to post it on whether downloadable format for anybody to be able to utilize it and sort through it and sift in a way that doesn't need to involve you. That's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that you post, people can utilize at will, and sometimes you get incredible feedback on some of it in ways that you hadn't even analyzed it. As an interim piece, because we know the responsibilities we have to POC, we're going to put lots of effort in being able to provide the information that we can in a timely way. And I'm concerned with the quality of that data. That's all I'm pointing out, to make sure that just simply providing data is insufficient. That really, whatever goes to you is going sort of my signature that in fact that's accurate information. So it's a challenge. It's a current challenge that we have, but you're not being ignored on this issue. Been very clear on the need for it so that you can do your job as well as this POC.
Sure. So this is more of a question of the reliability and the sort of validity of the data that's being shared with us. So yeah, that's something that we can revisit at a later time too, just to make sure that we're able to do our jobs, right? So I'm going to move on to a topic that's pretty important, programming. We know that programming, it's a resource that allows our young people to be productive, to maybe improve their behavior, their perspective, expose them to different things, and hopefully lead them, to better outcomes. What's your philosophy when it comes to programming, or the programming that's offered inside, and what it does for the young people?
Well, I've given you an advance of one a foundational piece for me, which is to make sure that it's the appropriate programming for the needs of the individual. So we know that some of that is based on, we can say on specific type of population, but ultimately this has to do with individual risk and needs assessments, where that person is, and making sure that we have something that provides them. In the industry, people focus on quantity of programming and services provided, really missing the appropriateness of it and the fidelity to the principles of the program itself. I always have to worry about that because it is not true that some programming is better than no programming. That's not true. We know that some programming is counterproductive depending on the needs of the individual and the type of programming. Second is then we move to make certain conclusions that say this type of programming does or doesn't have an effect without taking into account the quality of the programming and the instructor involved. We know that that has a tremendous effect. So it's starting with the assessment of the individual needs, matching the right person to the right program, and then making sure that's the fidelity of the program components, the instructors, and how that's delivered. All of those matter. And moving forward, sort of my perspective on how to approach this. And then when we talk about programming, there's a whole variety of things, and maybe we should have started there on what people think of. They say programming. It's sort of a general term in which sometimes we throw things in there that have to do with therapeutic programming versus things that are important, but that have to do with creation and personal development and education and all that.
Did you finish that thought? I'm sorry.
Maybe I didn't, but
Yeah, I think so. And I definitely think that there is a difference in the type of programming, and sometimes some of these things start to sort of take the form of a service versus a program, right? And we see that being offered. But I'd like to know how you think the department is doing when it comes to its offering of programs, whether it's your definition, our definition, like how's the department doing when it comes to its lineup of programming that's provided to the young people?
Like you want me to grade ourselves like a self-assessment grade?
I
Well,
do.
well, I'm not satisfied. That is part of what has led to what I am sharing as the goals moving forward and separating the populations and having an interdisciplinary group paradigm and really asking for full ownership and participation by our other county partners. That is all really a result of my assessment that there's tremendous room for improvement here because the programming that we provide has to be consistent, predictable, whole person based. So that's the goal we're working toward. If we were already satisfying all of those, then that wouldn't be the goal that I set forward. So in a way, the reason why the focus moving forward to Los Padrinos, for example, is surrounds those pieces because that's an area where we have current challenges, but that is vital because it's really at the core of everything that we do as probation with respect to the juvenile space. So no, I'm not satisfied with what we're providing currently, but I see a way forward to do better.
Forward looking is always great. I see a lot of the issues that we're facing, even if we're talking about staffing and their well-being. It all in some ways ties into the issues of programming. If the youth are not occupied, or if they feel like they're bored, they're engaging in things that, or they're behaving poorly, by sort of explanation of some other staff members. And if we're talking about performing needs assessments and having programs available, well, you're saying person-based programming, the programs are not even available if you're conducting the assessments. And so you could really look forward to a lot of the misbehaving that would all be sort of perpetuated, in my opinion. Now, I think we all know about, or not we all, some have been talking about the reassignment of some caseworkers in SYTF, right? And we know that there are some programming issues, but the young people are spending time in the unit, they're watching the movies. None of that is happening anymore. They're underoccupied. They have some supposedly bad habits, but it's all going back to programming. And so I'd like for you to maybe talk about, one, the decision to reassign caseworkers, and also how programming has been impacted in that decision, or how it might be aligned to that problem more so. Let me know if I need to rephrase that, because that was a little all over the place.
No, you weren't all over the place, but I'm not making the connection on the reassignment of 6 caseworkers to actually be in with the youth with
Sure.
the programming component.
So maybe let's take it one step at a time. Can we first talk about because that's something that we talked about at the last meeting, and I wanted to maybe know or force the two together. You said that it was something that you were going to be looking into at the last POC meeting. So the first question would be, for those caseworkers, can you provide an update on those assignments, and if there was any consideration for reversing that decision to reassign those caseworkers?
Yeah, the caseworkers piece is this is a tough piece that I've had to talk about with just about every constituent as of late. And really, I'm getting to the point where I believe our employees that are the caseworkers are really doing a disservice here and taking valuable time for what we're trying to do in this system for personal gain. And I really am at the point where I don't appreciate it.
Okay.
We're in a position in which we have incredible immediate needs. And I'm asking every employee, including myself, to pitch in for those basic functions that we need to do. And individuals have different perspectives on their specific assignments. And I'm always open to reconsider and take a look at the facts as presented by one party versus another. But what I can say is that this issue of asking employees to serve the same population here versus there is now getting to the point where I think has been completely out of proportion, and there's far too much energy being spent on this versus the rest of the system. Caseworkers are an important part of what we do, and the services that we provide to the courts with respect to that is a non-negotiable. Where we've had to make adjustments to make sure that we don't have missed court dates or hearings, which was never the intent, I'm going to continue to do that. So I've met with the chief deputies on this issue. They've committed to making sure that additional resources come behind them. We do that portion. With respect to actually being in the units with YTF youth, we're going to ask employees during this period, while we are making changes to make sure that we have sufficient staff on the unit, for them to be there with the folks that they provide services to anyway and do part of that programming. I don't see the relationship between that and the programs that we provide to the population as a whole, nor did that move impede any of that. With respect to, go ahead.
No, actually, laying it out that way, I do agree. And I also understand that I was trying to force the two. And maybe it's because of what I'm hearing is that this population feels especially underserviced right now. And if it's because of the programming issue, if it's because they have these great relationships with their caseworkers and they feel like they've been reassigned. They're not, their needs are not being, their basic needs are not being met in their opinion. And so that's probably where the connection comes from. How do we better support SYTF youth day to day from a casework perspective, from a programming perspective? How do we do it?
Yeah, and the absolute fair part of this was once again a misstep on actually communicating with both the youth and the employees, and like I mentioned before, the reasons why we need to do this right now, and then getting some better ideas from them on the implementation piece. Working so fast, we have so many things that when you miss that, you sort of lose perspective on the whole move. These folks are still with the same population, SYTF, and so we want them to be committed to this population. We want them to be there and do this component of it. And there is no doubt in my mind, and I think it's clear to everyone else, that as a strategy, we are underserving in terms of making sure that our youth every single day have a sufficient number of pro-social activities that they're engaged in. This is important, or should be important, to everybody, irrespective of what position you take ideologically, because it serves two things. One, if your number one objective is the well-being of the young person, then certainly having them engaged in activities and work that is meaningful to them is a strategy that is needed for their development. If you are worried about the safety of officers and the staff, having youth engaged is a security strategy. We know that having them engaged in activities that make them feel good, keep them intellectually occupied, we know that that has an effect on lower incidents of violence, for example. So regardless of where you stand on this, we sort of have a common interest in making sure that this takes place. And on a daily basis, for example, I'm engaging my administrative staff and reassigning people to make sure that moving forward, as an example, to get to specifics, kids get to school every single day. So as of recently, I get a report every single day on what we're doing to make sure they get to school. That's a commitment that we have. It's a right moving forward. We could expect that from every one of these areas as we move forward, as we deal with what was the staffing crisis, and we're able to make some significant changes there. Then the focus continues to be on how meaningful is the activity that we have for the young people, day in and day out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions. I think in the interest of managing time and seeing that Wendy has turned on her video, it's time to move on to questions from. Yeah, I'm taking it as that. And so I do have a couple more questions, but I'd like to leave it to Wendy.
Yes.
See, I'm paying attention here. So yeah, I'll leave it to Wendy to open the floor to attendees to raise any questions or concerns that they have. And Wendy, please facilitate that for us.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually sorry to interrupt the conversation. It's nice to hear your minds at work. And thank you, Chief. That was really a refreshing time of your answering those questions. And I know we have lots of people on the call who are members of the public and your staff who are interested in asking questions. So if you want to get in the queue, click on the raise your hand function, which is the little hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you're dialing in on the phone, you dial *6. That I just made that up. Don't dial *6. Dial *3 on your phone. You're going to dial *6 to unmute after we call on you. And we will begin with public comments. So please raise your hand and dial *3 to put yourself in the queue. Or you can send a message to info@poc.lacounty.gov. So we will start with Shireen Senegal. Shireen, we're going to, yes.
Can you let everyone know that we're now doing 1 minute if we didn't already?
1 minute. 1 minute unless you need translation, and then it's 2 minutes. So we'll start with Shireen, and you are unmuted.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chief. Good to see you again, and thank you, Commissioner Jackson. Great questions. For me, it's just a quick two-part. One is, Chief, would you be open to having a survey for the community members, nonprofits, organizations, listing the key sort of issues that exist within probation so that we can contribute our ideas, our thoughts, our plans, and our expertise. And the second is I'm hoping we could be one of the ones on your tour to really come in the community. My focus is on justice reform. And as you know, parents who are incarcerated, their kids have 60% chance of being incarcerated. And on June 21st, we're hosting something that is supported by LA County called the State of Reentry to create more access points to mental health for these youth and families that have been incarcerated. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shireen. Chief, if you want to respond, you're welcome to.
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, but I'm really looking forward to doing two things. One of them is I'm going to establish, and I'll make sure everyone here gets information on. I'm going to establish an online access point where folks can actually submit suggestions that we're going to be reviewing every day, so that we get that in real time. Because we know some of them are going to be recommendations for the system, but some of them are going to be very specific to the move to Los Padrinos or something that's happening. So we want to receive those sort of on a at least temporarily basis. But the other one is, that I mentioned before, is establish these advisory councils in which we'll have ongoing representation, and certainly encourage you to, when we put that out, to join as a member so that we have this ongoing relationship. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Maria, oops, sorry,
I'd
go
like
ahead.
to ask, just before we move on to Maria, I'd like to sort of offer, Chief, if you want the POC, if you want me as chair to be involved in any of the listening piece, whether we are helping sort of establish strategy or execute anything, we'd be more than happy to collaborate with you on that. I'd actually love that. So.
Agreed.
Thank you. Yeah, we will.
Okay, Maria de Lira, we're going to unmute you. Oh, I just lost Maria. Did we lose her, Janae?
I think so. We can come back
Okay.
to-
Yeah, Maria, if you can raise your hand again, we'll get you on again, but we'll go next to James Maddox. James, you can begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It appears as though the focus of the problems with the probation department has been on the facilities and the buildings. However, it seems that many of the problems are of a personnel and structural nature rather than of a facilities and building nature. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go next to Eric. Eric, you can begin.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. ¿Puede proceder? Jennifer, ¿me cambias el reloj a 2 minutos, please? Puede empezar.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Eric Osorto y
Hi, my name is Eric Osorto.
estoy con Anti-Receiving Coalition.
I'm with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
En mi opinión sobre lo que está pasando en Silmar,
My
que los
opinion about
menores,
what's happening at Silmar,
que los menores necesitan caseware porque ellos te ayudan como en consejería. Cada semana hablan con uno sobre
the minors need help with their casework because they provide counseling and once a week are meeting with them.
sobre tus sentimientos, cómo te sientes y te dan consejos.
Talking about your feelings, how you're feeling, they give you advice.
Igual ayudan como a comunicarse con la familia como por videollamada.
They help you to
Y-
be able to communicate with your family, to be able to ask for phone calls.
Y en mi opinión, pues los menores de Silmar, ellos necesitan personas así para que tengan mejores programas y al
And in my
igual,
opinion, the people at Silmar, they need help with people to get those kind of programs.
igual como yo, en mi experiencia
just like me and my experience.
Y tuve 2 años en Silmar y no teníamos nada que hacer,
I
no
was
habían,
in Silmar for 2 years. I didn't have anything to do.
no habían programas que hacer, solo pasábamos todo el día viendo la tele
There weren't programs. I just spent all day watching television.
y pues uno está joven y necesita como ocuparse la mente y pasar ocupado en algo.
And I mean, I'm young. I need a way to be able to keep my mind busy and to be busy with something.
Y en cambio, si tuviéramos actividades que hacer o algo, fuera diferente, no pensáramos en cosas malas
And
y,
instead, if we had things to do, we would be able to think differently and not think about bad things.
y la mente pasara más ocupada.
Just having your mind busier.
Y,
What's
y,
our-
¿cómo se llama? Y por eso es que necesitamos los caseware, porque ellos los ayudan como a uno pensar mejor, como por ejemplo mi caseware era Valles y él me ayudó de mucho. Él iba a hablar conmigo cada semana, él me aconsejaba y me
That's why
ayudaba a
we need
hacer
the
bien.
caseworkers, because they helped me. My caseworker was Valles, and he would come and talk to me every week. Muchas gracias, Eric. Ya se acabó su tiempo. Gracias. We'll go next to Akuyoe Graham. Still shows up that you're muted, so give me 1 second here. Okay, you can begin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much. I am Akuyo Graham, Spirit Awakening Foundation. And two things. I wanted to know if the chief would be open to some kind of a town hall with CBOs, because it seems to me that each time something happens of a dramatic nature in probation, like the overdose of the young man, probation as a whole goes on the attack. And we are often the recipients of those attacks. And it would be wonderful if we could respond to these incidents in a more compassionate way with one another. You know, if we could have a sit down with probation to look at what everybody was doing, to look at perhaps, you know, where we as CBOs, you know, where we can perhaps take more responsibility or work together better with probation, rather than arbitrarily creating laws that just attacks everyone. It's really debilitating, and it's dehumanizing, and it's disrespectful. Thank you.
Thank you, Akuyo, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name at first. Did you want to respond to that, Chief?
Yes, I am open to that. I think it's a great idea. And no, I don't. I would hate for anybody to think that probation or I are on the attack, or quite the contrary. And so, yes, let's find a way to do that.
I would add that I know Akuyo personally. I know that she is over an exceptional program that I know that young people would benefit from. And it's no question that we should and will, and I think this is something we should probably co-host, co-facilitate a town hall where we're hearing from the CBOs and what they have to offer. So thank you, Akuyo, for coming to comment today.
Yeah.
And thank you, Chief, for being open to that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Chair Jackson. I don't know if you're aware, Chief, but the Probation Oversight Commission actually provided some town halls for employees only that have a similar structure to what was just recommended. So we certainly could do that if that's something that would be helpful in terms of just using our organizing leverage. So let us know. We will go next to Oscar Alexis Mejia.
Hi, my name is Oscar Mejia. Currently, do you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm currently in Amity. I just got released out of prison, and being here at Amity, I was given the opportunity to mentor individuals that are getting out of DJJ and out of actually the probation system. And they sent about 8 of them, and I created these introspective groups for them and started facilitating. Some things that I've learned is that these young men do not understand about crime impact. They don't understand emotional intelligence. They don't understand the harm that they have caused. So we're throwing them out here, and obviously there's a huge red flag that something's going on in there. And I believe that, Chief, you're in the right place. And
We lost you, Oscar.
start partnering up. I'm sorry. Hello?
We lost you for a minute.
I'm
You can go ahead and go a few seconds over your timer because we lost you for a second. You said that the chief was here in the right place and then
Yeah,
we lost you.
Yeah, and I encourage you to continue partnering up with like these nonprofits, because obviously, as you said, it's not a competition, it's not a challenge. We got to work as a one community. Currently, I represent ARC, and there's a lot of men there, and there's a lot of other resources just like ARC, which I believe if we all get along and not create a hostile environment, that we could literally work together and make this a beautiful place for these young men that are getting out. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Welcome home. We're glad you're here today.
Chief,
Next up,
can
go
I
ahead.
ask really quickly, if I could, Wendy, Chief, are you aware of any programming that focuses on crime impact or victim awareness for the young people in there? Does that exist? Has it existed?
I'm not sure. I'm going to have to follow up with any prior or current program. Look at the inventory. It's a good question.
Just curious. That's something that I'd be interested in. So, Wendy, just something to
Okay.
note.
Next up, we have Sir. Sir, can you please dial *6 to unmute?
One, two, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sir James Bailey. My question is, in November of 2020, the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors passed a resolution to phase out probation's oversight of young people by the year 2025. I love what I'm hearing from my brothers at ARC, like YJC and Layup, all the organizations in Layup. Curious on how your work, how your job leads to that. Helps the probation officers, helps the CBOs, if there's any planning towards the goal in 2025. Thank you.
Chief, did you want to address that?
Opportunity. No, I should not.
Okay.
Sometimes I forget that no was not an option when asked to comment on something. But what I would say is I'm focused on the role of probation and what we could do today to better the lives of the young people that the court sends to us. So with respect to the larger questions on where juvenile justice will be in a few years, I know that there's immediate work to do and that it's not working against such a goal. But in the reality that today and for the foreseeable future, there is a role of probation to serve, to really be the place where we collect services for these young people without extending the period that they're within the system, and really working to do the opposite, to make sure that we're creating the opportunities for them to exit the criminal justice system and not return. And so that's where my focus is, and I don't think it's in conflict with those resolutions.
Thank you. So we don't have anyone else with their hands raised. So Chair Jackson, with your approval, I'll go to some of the written submitted questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Chief, we've heard many questions at probation oversight commissions about commission meetings about staff safety. Can you talk about how you and your team hopes to address staff safety, in particular in the juvenile facilities?
Yeah, I really wish there was a single thing that we could do that would solve the issue, but really, from my perspective, it's a collection of changes that together are going to improve the system. So one of them is, I've mentioned, to address staffing. You need enough staff to be able to provide services, and for officers and for youth and for all the visitors to feel safe. We're getting there in terms of the change of location. We had a comment earlier that said, look, this isn't simply a facility issue. That's true. facilities was part of the problem, but not the entire problem. And really, staffing is a required component to have a safe environment. By moving and consolidating into places, we're going to be more efficient in terms of the number of staff we have. There are a number of other things that we're doing in conjunction with the union to make sure that, to the extent possible, staff are where they prefer to be. We think that that's going to increase the amount of staff that come to work and their buy-in. In addition to that, earlier in the month, I put out a notice that I'm going to focus on 2 trainings moving forward in the next fiscal year. One's going to focus on really making sure that we train our officers, we provide them an opportunity to have de-escalation skills and have that sort of as an ongoing component so that they feel competent. The other one is with making sure that we have ongoing and quarterly training for how to safely respond to aggressive or resistant behavior so that officers feel empowered to know how to do that in the safest way possible. The other component is, I mentioned before, that making sure that we have activities for young people is a security strategy. We do it for all these other reasons, but actually making sure they're engaged in activity that they find meaningful personally is in fact a safety and security strategy. There are other things like making sure that we have smaller living communities. We may have a juvenile hall that's fairly large, but if we break those into smaller sort of living units, we know that that is positive and it helps sort of with the safety and security in that type of environment. And so we think it's all of these things combined that are really going to help change sort of the environment and the tone and make everybody that's on that juvenile campus feel safer.
Thank you. There are also a number of questions that were submitted that are around the lines of promotions and retention, staff morale, around those issues. The questions basically say things like, how are you going to promote staff that have been skipped over for promotions? How are you going to handle hiring and promotions in the probation department? I know also our partners at the Office of Inspector General have asked some questions about the discipline process. So I think maybe if you could just answer more broadly your thoughts and experience in other places about personnel practices and how you can bring those best practices to LA County.
Yeah, I mean, we have established civil service rules on we have examinations and we have lists and we have that piece of it. But in my experience, the things that really create a pool of best prepared people to take on those roles really revolve around a couple of things. One of them is making sure that everybody gets access to the type of experiences and training that prepares them for the next piece. It's really tough for people to make self-assessments on whether they're the best candidate. We're usually not the best judge of that, and that's why we leave that to the panel and the test. But what we can do is make sure that people are on a level playing field for the experiences and the training to then prepare them to go to the next level. So it has to be an investment in staff to do that. And some of those are leadership classes, some of them are specific skills, some of them are experiences, and it has to do more with transfers and opportunities. So they have the experience that then prepares them for those next roles and makes them competitive. The second one, which is a bit more difficult, and I don't want you to think I'm not answering directly, but it has to do with staff believing that the system is fair. And when I look at the series of questions presented without going into details because they're not necessarily facts, but what I can tell you is that they speak to a sufficient number of staff not believing that there's been a fair system in the past. So I really, that's important to me because staff, how they feel about the process and whether it's fair matters to me. And so I'm not tied to doing or not doing things that'll sort of help raise people's feeling toward that. And I look forward to hearing, what I really want to hear from folks is sometimes folks give you a list of injustices that they perceive that have occurred. And not that I want to be insensitive with respect to that, but I always want to hear, please help me by telling me the ways in which I can take action and improve the system so that we're either not doing those things or the folks perceive that it's more fair. And so I am really interested in hearing from folks, but employees, especially employees that believe that there have been missed opportunities, on how we can do that. And I know from my prior experiences, some of that is in making sure that we are the portion that I already described, making sure that folks have the opportunity. The other centers around making sure that we are giving people an opportunity to know where the positions are, rather than simply, there's nothing worse than a position pops up and you go, well, nobody told me, nobody. So, you know, we have a number of things that the county does already to post the positions, but I'm interested in the ones that are meaningful to staff and really gains their trust that we're doing the right thing. What I can tell you is, personally, there's no preferential treatment from me to any given person, or all folks are on a level playing field with me within the department. I respect civil service process. I respect the process that the union is a part of, and they're not. So, but what I'm interested is how I can gain sort of that credibility with staff so that they understand that with me, it's about performance and performance in the job and nothing else. And that's the system that I'm going to support. And to the extent that they see something different, point it out to me so that I can intervene if there's a miss somewhere within the system.
Thank you. I think I'll read one more question.
If I could ask a follow-up question, because I know earlier we talked about paradigm shifts, right? And we know that there are cultural issues or issues with culture within the department. And a lot of that has to do with what staff believe, right? Do you believe that you'll be able to sort of establish credibility? Do you believe that you'll be able to successfully change their mind about the department?
Oh, Chair Jackson, I have to believe. I am, yes, I'm going all in on this. And the reason I feel so confident about it is because if we do the right thing for the right reason, it's a matter of time. People see and they'll respect that, even if they disagree on the smaller points or on the margins or what have you. And so I know, having worked in other places where there have been morale issues, or working in other places where there's been a shift in culture, that this is absolutely possible. And so employees are generally very fair-minded. They know what a just system looks like, what an unfair system is. And even if they have been through difficult times, they see change, they acknowledge change, and they get on board. So as long as folks are willing to continue to share very openly and sort of have a fair assessment as we move forward, I know that folks will be able to see that being extraordinarily transparent with them and responsive and fairness is really a core value that I have, and I know folks will be able to respond to.
I appreciate
That
that.
actually, yeah,
Wendy?
that feels like a good place to stop, I think. So there are a few questions that were submitted, and I would expect we may receive others that we will send to the chief. And what we can potentially do is that if there are some that you would like to answer, we could post those questions and your answers in writing to topic on our website. So Janae, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but under the town hall, we can add supplemental documents in which people would be able to click on the document that would show the questions and answers. So we'll work with you to do that and make sure you've seen all of those questions. But thank you for your participation today. Chair Jackson, did you want to wrap up here?
Yeah, I want to first start by saying how historical it is that we're ending on time. And Guillermo, we certainly appreciate your time with us today, and we are looking forward to working more closely with you. I will say that your answers here, of course, action followed by, talking is very important, but I'm looking forward to us doing something great together and for us to be able to have a very strong and positive relationship based on much of what you've shared today, right? And thank you to everyone who has spent some time with us this afternoon. This marks the end of this meeting, and take care.